Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Sanctuary. Landed on planet Isbir. House and Buer. They were once known as the Agrarians. Vendrick seemed to have responded well to the doctor's attention, and had regained some of his usual animation and poise. The rest of them were looking and feeling thoroughly dishevelled, sporting new shaven patches on their scalps, and anaesthetic hangovers. Alison in particular had needed a quadruple dose of the doctor's preferred general anaesthetic, and was nursing a plastic tub as she sat and listened, looking decidedly green around the gills. I suppose they still are, deep down. But the Agreens as they exist now are very, very different to the species that once dominated the galaxy. How do you even know about them? Alison asked. She would have killed to crawl into bed and sleep off her headache, but with their implants gone, they needed to have the conversation here aboard ship, where the Sanctuary could translate for them, and Vendrick had insisted on it happening immediately. Their existence is ancient history, distorted a little by the passage of time, but preserving data parity is a prerequisite technology for interstellar travel. Our archives are inherited from those who came before us, who inherited their data from the ones before them, and so on. And so on? How many and so ons are there? Some tens of thousands. Vendrick used the number nonchalantly, as if it was common knowledge that tens of thousands of life forms had been and gone before. Civilizations rise and fall in deep time. The records referring to the Agrarians and their arch-rivals extend back more than a quarter of a grand galactic rotation. Naturally, much about them has been utterly forgotten. Kirk spoke up. To be more precise, about 65 million Earth years. Wait, I'm still hung up on this and so on thing. Tens of thousands? It was so strange to see Kirk make a gesture, and not have the knowledge of what he meant by it just come to her. His body language was different, alarmingly so. She could no more read the motion he made with his hands than she could interpret Vendrick's bioluminescent pulses. We're not the first species, Alison. Nobody has the first idea who was. Even the Agrarians apparently had their own records, going back and back and back, Vendrick added. The inherited archives are immense. A whole society could labour at delving their secrets and barely finish the index before their time came to an end. While storing the yottabytes of information involved is trivial, reading it takes time. Even the very best search algorithms take decades to trawl through the available data, and that's when searching for very narrow terms. Those that have done so have turned up records going back incomprehensibly further than the Agrarians. The best working estimate for the time being is that sapient, spacefaring life first appeared in this galaxy, something like 2 billion of your home planet's years ago. The record duration for any civilization seems to be about 100,000 years, Kirk said. After that, they just decline, retreat to their home planet, and fade away. There are 3 on their way out right now. That is, if you don't count the Agrarians, and one other. Who? I mean, who are the 3 on their way out? The Omuaru, Zerifs, and... Kirk cleared his throat and spoke a word that sounded like a radio sound effect. When Alison later tried to describe it, she had to settle lamely for a complicated mental image involving throwing a squeaky dog toy full of napalm at a beehive. If you don't mind, I would like to stay on topic, Vendrick said. She guessed that the streak of pale pink he was displaying indicated mild irritation. We can discuss the morality of species another time. Right, I guess, Alison conceded. So these guys bucked the trend. They're still around? In a matter of speaking. Well, where are they? Vendrick simply raised one of his massive paws and tapped at the scar lines on his scalp with his chunky first finger. In the implants, he said. I don't... Huh? There is a reason there is no such thing as a synthetic sapient, Vendrick said, apparently going off on a tangent, but Alison gave him the benefit of the doubt. Historically, they've all been abject failures, Kirk explained. Finally insane? No. Just apathetic, nihilistic, and introverted, he elaborated. Less Skynet, more... Kirk thought for a second. More... Eeyore. You've watched Winnie the Pooh? Bad comparison, Kirk admitted. Eeyore may have been melancholic and depressed, but he was never suicidal. Synthetic sapiens invariably self-terminate. The most anybody's ever gotten out of them is that they apparently just don't see the point of existing. They take one look at entropy and quit. Okay, what does this have to do with the Agrarians? The problem was theoretically solved some years ago by a courtly researcher called Beffrey, Vendrick told them. She posits that organic neural structures, by dint of natural selection, must include a self-preservation drive, because all the ones that don't go extinct even on low-class planets. Purely synthetic structures, however, contain no such lifeguard, and therefore any intelligence founded purely on a synthetic substrate shares that lack. I get you. Beffrey proved the principle by uploading a copy of her own intellect, or rather a simulated version of her own brain, onto her computer core. The digital version of herself, dubbed Beffrey 2, was, apparently, just as euthymic and optimistic as Beffrey 1. Vendrick paused briefly for effect. At first. Oh, I can see where this is going, Kirk muttered. Allison had to agree. It took a long time, but Beffrey 2 degraded, becoming more and more like a purely synthetic lifeform and less like a Corti, until she eventually self-terminated, Vendrick confirmed. That didn't stop the original Beffrey, of course. To a Corti, seeing a copy of your own mind go insane and suicide is just a data point, and an engineering challenge. So she hit on the idea of using implants, Allison added, and let me guess, that somehow fixed the problem? Vendrick paused, taken aback. Even Kirk seemed surprised. Astonishment shone bright on Vendrick's skin. How did you? He asked. A hunch. So you think that the Grains, mentally uploaded themselves like this Beffrey did, and that they now live in neurocybernetics because for whatever reason, being plugged into a living nervous system stops them from going totally depressive? Both of the aliens gave her a long look. I was expecting the explanation to take longer, Vendrick finally confessed. For his part, if Allison was any judge at all of body language, Kirk looked smug. Never underestimate a human, old friend, he chastised, confirming her suspicions. How come we never hear from them? Allison asked. I'm not privy to their motivations and decisions, Vendrick replied. But we do, in fact. They have agents. Individuals who move amidst us purely organic beings, ensuring that the secret never gets out. Keeping the Agrain's continued existence a secret, and their own nature the stuff of paranoid conspiracy. The hierarchy, Kirk said. Oh yes. Up until very recently, I would have considered seriously entertaining the idea of their existence to be a symptom of, if not mental illness, then certainly credulity. Allison tilted her head at him, genuinely curious. What changed your mind? Your people have a saying. The first time is happenstance, the second time is coincidence. Do you know it? The third time is enemy action. Allison finished, nodding. A very Deathworld aphorism, Vendrick opined, but the logic is compelling. So, what was the first time? Kirk asked. The quarantine field, Vendrick said. At the time I chalked it up to panic. Forgive me, old friend, but you're as guilty as this as most others. One thing that tribal and individualistic species fail to understand about her species, such as we, is far from being an altruistic, cooperative social structure. A herd is an inherently cowardly and selfish thing. He looked at Allison. I suspect that humans are uniquely placed in having both the predatory perspective to understand that, and the civility to actually talk it over, rather than eat us. Allison shrugged. I'm no predator, she demurred. Suppose you were, though, and were hunting some herd-based grazer to survive. How would you do it? She shrugged. She's seen plenty of Animal Planet in her time. I guess I'd pick off the easy target, she said. You know, or an old one or a lame one. And what would the herd do? Vendrick asked. Well, they run away from me, I guess. Exactly, Vendrick said cryptically. Allison shook her head and exhaled. Okay, I used up all my quick on the uptake earlier, she said. Spell it out for me. Vendrick pulsed Udinil. She had no idea what that meant. Suppose some dangerous thing was going to kill your elderly parent, or eat Julian in his weakened state, he asked. What would you do? Oh. You would fight. Yes. She recognized embarrassment among the cocktail of hues that fed on Vendrick's body. I consider myself to be a morally outstanding being, but you must understand, if the hunters were dragging away my free mates and all of my offspring, and I had the chance to escape, I would flee, and leave them all to be devoured. That is my instinct. That is how my species behaves. The only reason I know to feel ashamed of that fact is because I have had much contact with other species who would be appalled by the sense of humans, Gauians, and the domain species. Are abject and contemptible cowards. But that is who we are, and no power in the galaxy save evolution could change us. He composed himself with a shiver, allowing his emotional cues to fade. At first, this served as an adequate explanation for the deployment of the soul quarantine field. Heard panic, one koollman with the authority to order it done, doing so instinctively in response to a perceived threat. No blame was attached, and she remained my good friend for many years. Happenstance. Her death was an unexpected, well, coincidence. How did she die? Kirk asked. A cerebral hemorrhage, a large one. Mercifully, it is doubtful that she even knew that it was happening before she fell unconscious. It was odd and made me uneasy. I knew her to be one who sought constant medical reassurance for every last little thing. Every muscular discomfort brought on by sitting still for hours was the first symptom of some virulent death or pathogen, a minor neurosis. She was a hypochondriac. Your language never ceases to amaze me with the way that it packs complicated concepts into terse and efficient little words. Yes, not to a crippling degree, but it was a rare week that passed without some visit to the medics and their scanners. Any sign of an impeding bleed in her brain would surely have been flagged and corrected. She would not have stood for anything else. So there's your coincidence, Kirk said. The enemy action? Vedrick flushed white. Horror? She seemed to remember white being horror, or some similar emotion. Nobody on Earth has the technology to generate antimatter in the quantities that devastated your San Diego, he said, the translator not able to correctly handle the mangled pronunciation. Or maybe it just didn't have the name in its database. No known species has any incentive to do so, as Kirk will be able to attest. The general mood at the Security Council before his departure was that the Deathworlders are not to be further antagonized. That much has not changed. What about the Hunters? Arzan asked. They antagonized the bejesus out of us. Ah, yes, the Hunters, Vendrick said. He stood and began to pace the room, steps slow and steady. They play a role in all of this as well. Kirk's head swayed. What role? Well, old friend, when the Agrarians uploaded their personalities to a data format, what do you suppose happened to their discarded physical forms? Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Prey ship. The human second world, prey space. Alpha, of the brood with steel teeth. 20 of its very best brood lessers, chosen specifically for the dangerous task of boarding a Deathworld vessel, were dead. None of them sending more than a flash of confusion and pain. Most sent nothing at all. The Hunters were being hunted. Sickening. Still, that was a state of affairs which would not continue. The initial confusion was over. The last crew of this freighter were barricaded and under siege. All of them only one open breach, and one nerve gem grenade away from being meat in the maw. It focused its attention on this other force, calling every one of its brood to his own location, watchfully covering every entrance, anticipating the assault. It never came. The Alpha was still pondering this delay. The aggressors did not have unlimited time before the battle outside turned against their ship. When its nostrils caught a hint of a scent. The aroma was delicious. The olfactory equivalent of the ecstasy, which was a taste of human flesh. It was still casting around, trying to identify the source of that intoxicating fragrance, when the knife entered the side of his throat. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Refugee freighter, Simbrine system. The outer reaches. Captain Owen Powell. Forking hell, Murray. When you grabbed that pipe, I thought we were done. Murray himself was bent over, hand between his knees, swearing softly. Powell was thoroughly impressed. The man had grabbed a metal pipe for a handhold while they had been dragging themselves along under the floor, only for it to turn out to be frying pan hot. How the Hunters hadn't heard the sizzle, and how Murray had refrained from making any noise at all, he wasn't sure. In fact, his comrade's first sign of pain was only now that they killed every Hunter in the room. The place was a carpet of greasy white bodies, stained with pinkish alien blood, and garnished in filthy black metal. The death of their Alpha had thrown the Hunters into just enough disarray for the team to haul themselves up through the floor access grate and fire into them, only stopping when they were absolutely certain that everything was dead. It hadn't exactly been elegant, but Powell cared less for elegant solutions than for whatever worked. You left the other guy dead and you went home. Doing it elegantly was a luxury he could live without. So far so good. He banged on the barricaded door and spoke the password. Oi, you lot. You want off this fucking ship or what? Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Ceres Base, Sol. Drew Cavendish. There was an email waiting for Drew when he finally got back to his office, tired and strung out from a meeting which had descended into recrimination and bickering rather than constructive planning. In fact, there were several messages, but most of them were routine. Only one stood out, tagged as it was with an urgent label. He'd already opened it before he read the origin address, a non-informant at seriesllc.org. The mail's name and content were just as mysterious. Mystery solved and run the attached program and load your corrupted CCTV footage. What he should do, of course, was to contact corporate security. He certainly shouldn't run an .exe of unknown provenance on the advice of an unknown sender. What he did was exactly what he shouldn't. He wasn't stupid about it. Drew had grown up as a computer nerd in his youth. He knew a few tricks. He copied the file onto a virtual machine, screened it with every security program he had access to, and only when he was certain that things were as secure as he could reasonably get them, did he run it and follow the mail's suggestion. After the bars had spent a minute filling up, and the program notified him unscrambled, he skipped straight to the missing segment of footage from the Harsuit workshop the morning Ace's suit had experienced the heat-filled malfunction. As he had expected, the CCTV footage was intact and unscrambled. There was something disturbingly familiar about the figure he saw entering the workshop. Something about the way they walked, their stance, their proportions, nagged at him. He knew this person, but for the life of him he couldn't place who it was. He racked his brain, trying to match all the little familiar details with everybody on Ceres base. That train of thought flew sideways off the rails when the figure on the screen turned around, and he saw his own face. Date point: 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Folfa, Planet Simbream, the Far Reaches. Ava Rios. You're back! Adam searched for his feet as she entered, ignoring whatever he'd been watching. Ava just sighed happily and buried her face in his chest. He put a hand around the back of her head and rubbed it. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, she said. You were right. I was being uptight, I guess. Change your mind? A bit, yeah. I thought about it some, and I guess... You guess? Ava nodded. Are we going swimming this weekend then? She asked. Do you want to? Do you? Adam paused. It sounds like fun, he said. Then we'll go, Ava agreed. Are you sure? If you're not... Adam. She went up on tiptoes to kiss him. No, I'm not sure. Our home was destroyed. I moved halfway across the galaxy with you. I'm living with you now. I miss my mom and dad. I miss my friends. I miss... Come on. I had a conversation today with a 5-foot-tall raccoon man who thinks I'm weird for praying. I'm not sure about anything, except that I'm not ready for any of this. She sighed. Maybe I just need to leave behind what I used to think was normal or weird. Maybe there's no such thing. Maybe we just need to stop worrying and try and have fun. Adam finished the thought for her. Ava smiled into his chest. Yeah, let's do that. Date point: 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. HMS Myrmidon, Simbrine System, The Far Reaches. Captain David Manning. Myrmidon, strike team has the survivors. We're pulling out. First good news I've had for several minutes, pal. Things were going badly. Swarm ships were dogpiling the beleaguered human craft, warping in from all across the huge sphere of their blockade. Each one cut down their options. Each one robbed them of safe havens in the melee. As their options dwindled, as the number of bogies climbed, each blink jump took longer to calculate, especially given the need to coordinate with Caledonia to ensure that they didn't both jump to the same place. The fact that the other ship had joined the fight was the only thing that had kept Myrmidon from being overwhelmed, but both of them were now running short of staying power. Caledonia had just trickled below the 50% mark. Myrmidon was even lower. Their EOB was full. EUR was working overtime, tasking the limits of both the systems and their human operators. 3 of the Skymasters were offline venting heat, and the rest were borderline. The CIWs had all run out of ammo. The battlefield was a hazard in its own right now, thick with tumbling wreckage and high-speed shrapnel. Learning that the raid was a success put a huge top-up in his morale. Right up until the point where the whole ship lurched and screamed. Report! We're hit amidships. Looks like it took out a capacitor bank. Fire on sea deck, mid. Damage control, seal and vent. Sir, we're below the red line. The red line was their minimum threshold for jumping back to anchorage. They had only one shot at survival. Skymasters to ballistic. Shunt the reactor output to emergency charge. Throw out our witches. Aurora crackled around her as Myrmidon flung wide her energy-catching shields, which flared and glowed wherever they intersected some hurling particle or cloud of gas. Above red line in 4 minutes. Swarm ships closing. Guns are holding off the big ones. Little ones are through. Manning grabbed his microphone. All hands prepare to repel boarders. Signal from Caledonia, sir. They request a sitrep. Tell them it's a bit sticky over here. For a few busy seconds, Manning was left alone as the crew rushed to do their jobs. His ship groaned as the first Hunter boarding proboscis violated her. Signal from Caledonia, sir. Quote, took liberty of arranging backup. Stop. Sit tight. Stop. Marines report hostile contact on B deck aft. Ditto D deck port. Ditto D deck forward. Ditto A deck dorsal. Manning grabbed a pistol from the weapons locker at the back of the bridge. Red line? 3 minutes 20, sir. He glanced at the information available to him. How long till that big one catches us? Well, the little dropships weren't a problem for making good their escape. If the huge ship now bearing down on them latched on, then its tonnage would add hugely to the energy demands of the jump engine, effectively trapping them on the battlefield to be swamped and devoured. Evasive action would only serve to drain their remaining capacitors of much-needed energy. About 2 minutes 40, sir. Manning scowled, unloaded his weapon. He could hear gunfire on the deck outside the bridge. Then we do as the man says, and sit tight. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Lower District, 1st City, Planet Perfection. Vacano, the contact. Next. The being that entered her study did so cloaked, as requested, and supporting themselves on a walking aid of some kind. Vacano double-checked her fast for the day, refamiliarizing herself with the details of this particular client. It was redundant. Vacano's memory for her clients was absolutely perfect, but that perfection came about as a result of her scrupulous attention to revision. Even so, there was no way she could forget this particular client. From the very first day, their deal had been an enormously lucrative one for her. From what her networks told her, the client was making good use of the information in turn. In some circles, there would be a cause for significant alarm. But not in this one. All the contact cared about was getting paid. She offered her guests the courtesy of a seat appropriate to their anatomy, which they sank into with a grateful groan of relief. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, they said. Your notice is always short, Wagner replied. But for you, I'll extend the courtesy of not minding. She watched her guest throw back the hood of their cloak and don a pair of vision-correcting lenses before beginning their business transaction. So, what is it you want this time, Dr. Hussein? Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Battle space, Simbrian system, the far reaches. Riley Jackson. Jump complete. They're covered in borders. If that big one latches on, they won't be able to jump out. Riley was still getting used to having a partner in the backseat, but right now she was glad that Lieutenant Simmons was there. So much was going on in the battle space that she would have hated to try and fly, gun, and play the music all at once. Copy that, Header Wing. Clear out the little ones. Only those within 1 click of Miradon. Wilco, Odyssey, Header Wing. Weapons tight, sweep and clear. Till Valhalla. Hoorah! Odyssey Wing, Firebird actual. Let's fuck up the big one. She grinned along with the relish in Simmons' voice. Copy that. Arming a bruiser. Riley came about and canopy rolled around and underneath a smash Hunter ship at 12 Gs, comfortable and grinning as Firebird automatically shunted some of its ample energy reserves into the warp engine's inertial compensation system to protect them from the punishing acceleration. A snow of frozen atmosphere, metal debris, and bits of crawling meat hissed on the force fields, but the maneuver ended with them lining up on the biggest ship, which was advancing a Myrmidon despite the efforts of her last functioning Skymaster to hold it at bay. The maneuver had been practiced thousands of times in the simulator. Now it was time to test if the programmers had got it right. Shield braking. She felt the familiar shove in the back as the GAU-8S howled beneath her, violently decelerating her ship. She heard Simmons counting under his breath. Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, Odyssey 1, Fox 3, he announced. Firebird lurched as the missile disengaged and tore away from them, and Riley peeled out of the attack run. 3 clicks away, a cloud of 30mm rounds smacked into the Hunter ship's shields, overwhelming them in a second. While a few penetrated, The ship was so large that the damage would be cosmetic at first, but their objective was complete. Half a second behind them, travelling much too fast for the eye to follow and still accelerating hard, the Bruiser anti-ship missile struck its target damaged ships. "Good kill," somebody yelled. The celebration was not premature. The Hunter ship had been broken in half, and both those halves were on fire and disintegrating. As dead could get. There was a broadcast in the clear. "Allied units, Myrmidon is above the red line. Much appreciated." The besieged ship vanished. An instant later, so did Caledonia. Seconds behind them, so too did Edda and Odyssey Wings. Date point: 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Sanctuary. Landed on planet Isbuk. Earth. Oh. Shit. Quite. So the Agrarians were wild, vicious, cannibal murder machines before they uploaded themselves? Oh no, not at all. But they were already a highly advanced civilization at the apex of their power, just before the fall. One with the capacity to treat a being's sense of self, their... how best to put this? Their soul? Alison suggested. Let us call it their subjective continuity of experience, which they were able to treat as data to be transferred from device to device. And deleted from the original? That sounds like you'd effectively suicide every time you moved on, Alison mused. The Agrarians did not seem to care for such philosophical vacillation. Vedric's tone suggested that he shared this dismissive attitude, but in the centuries immediately prior to their technological apotheosis, they set about exploiting their newfound liberation by creating a variety of custom-built bodies suitable for different environments and work. One of which was a biomechanical cast of soldier forms they developed specifically for going to war against the Vastraki. The Hunters? Yes. I take it they won? Oh yes, but only barely. The Vastraki were a tenacious foe, masters of weaponized forms of radiation, and the subjects of some considerable fascination. They are one of the more interesting and noteworthy species recorded in the archives. Why? Kirk asked. Because, old friend, they were the only spacefaring species other than, well, Vedric indicated Allison and the sleeping Julian, ever recorded as having evolved on the Class 12 planet. He sighed. And so the Agrarians destroyed them. They closed some asteroids, set them to collide with the Vastraki homeworld, and mopped up the few survivors. And therein lies the first happenstance. There was an alternative interpretation for the motive behind quarantining Earth, and quite aside from one herd animal's panic. You are Deathworlders, and the Agrarians will want you dead. Containing you is the first step in your destruction. What? By setting up an impenetrable force field? Alison scoffed. Doesn't that kind of stop them from throwing rocks at us? It would. If your home system did not already contain an ample supply of suitable rocks, orbiting well inside the shield boundary. And if that fails, they have other options lined up. Julian shifted on his cot, turned over slightly, and looked straight at Vedric. Even Alison jumped. None of them had even suspected he was awake. How'd you know that? He asked. The huge alien hesitated. Well, it stands to reason. Nothing that old or capable of wiping out one Class 12 species is going to fail to have contingency plans. Bullshit! Julian sat up, wincing at the mismatch between the reduced physical state of his leg and his kinesthetic sense telling him that his foot was now below the floor. You said these archives are yottabytes large. You said that even the best search algorithms take decades to produce the goods. You've had, what, a year? Since your friend died? How do you know that? Vedric countered. I watched the news. The death of the Goonvrak Secretary of Security from an unexpected brain hemorrhage made quite the headline. Don't try and deflect me. There's no way you could even know half this stuff, without it being common knowledge. How do you know it isn't? Because Kirk's been listening to you and asking questions, Julian pointed out. Kirk inclined his head, seeing the logic. If Kirk doesn't know it, then it's not common knowledge. If this hierarchy has worked for so long to keep their implant, civilization thing, whatever, a secret, and are competent enough to do all this stuff, then there's no way you figured it all out on your own in just 1 year. He paused. No offense. You're smart, Vedric, but nobody's that smart. Vedric sat with colours swarming on his flanks like a psychedelic 60s TV show special effect, as they all stared at him, waiting for an explanation. Finally, he settled down into one solid colour, the magnolia glow of resolve. Vedric took a deep breath and spoke. He called himself 6.